All right, folks. Thank you all for joining me here today. I hope you're having a lovely Saturday. My name is Emily. I'm an educator here at Clermont State Historic Site. You may know me from our children's programs. I'm the camp director, and I'm also the face of several of our walks and things like that. This is my first time doing a Facebook Live event, so I'm going to ask you all to bear with me. We might have some technical troubles here and there, but otherwise, I'm really excited to share this program with you today. So, we'll get started. So, welcome to the American Girls of Clermont State Historic Site. Before we get started today, because of the nature of Facebook Live, I cannot respond to your comments or questions during the live video. However, when it's over, I'll be in the comment section ready to answer any questions you may have or respond to any general comments. So, here we go. So, who are the American Girls of Clermont? This is an interesting question because there are American Girls of Clermont and then there's a program called the American Girls of Clermont. The who are these dolls who we're going to meet today. Each doll was created with care and historical accuracy to show a real historical figure who lived at Clermont State Historic Site anywhere between the 1650s and the 1930s. It is a program that we have done in partnership with Adrienne Westmore, a incredibly multi-talented local seamstress and friend of the site. And more about Adrienne's work in just a moment. But the dolls were created as a way to teach kids about history because it's a lot easier to understand history and visualize what the world used to look like in your head if you can see something in front of you that tells you about history. And it's a lot easier to have a doll that you can interact with to learn about history than just to look at old paintings and things like that. Many young historians that you meet in the field today got into history because of dolls like the American Girl dolls, myself included. So I always thought that dolls were a great way to get kids interested in history, and so did Adrienne. Adrienne actually approached us about this program a few years ago. She is such a wonderful seamstress, as you will see in just a moment. As Adrienne actually started her career, well, her seamstress career making doll clothes and went on to make costumes for theater, and then went back to doll clothes. Most of the designs were inspired by Joan Hines' book, The Heritage Doll Clothes, American Outfits for 18-inch Dolls, and she kind of worked off of those patterns to create the outfits we're going to see today. As far as our program goes, we started doing this program in real life before the pandemic in the summer of 2019. I actually have some photos from our first American Girl program. As you can see, it was very well attended. Kids in the audience were encouraged to bring their favorite doll with them, preferably an 18-inch tall doll because we actually made clothes together after the event. But it was up to the child whatever they wanted to bring. One little girl brought her Totoro. Sorry, folks, I have a phone next to me. Brought her Totoro plushie, and he fit into the American Girl doll shirt pretty well, so that was really cute. But yeah, we went around the house. We learned about history through the eyes of these cute dolls. And then we went up to our visitor center. We had an American Girl doll tee, and then we made clothes for our 18-inch tall dolls. So it's a lot of fun. Because of the pandemic, we were not able to hold any more of these real-life events, although we had planned several for the holiday season and for the summer. However, we can now bring this event to you live in person. And with that, I'm going to get into the actual dolls, the actual American Girls of Clermont. Oh, and one more thing before we start today. As you can tell, I'm already almost 7 minutes into this presentation. We have split the dolls in half. You may know we have 2 of these programs. One is today, the next one is on Saturday, January 30th. And we are going to cover the first 6 dolls this week and then the next 6 on the 30th. If you cannot make the next event, that's totally fine because it's going to be archived, so you'll be able to watch it whenever you like. All right, and with that, let's begin. The first doll that we're going to talk about today is the earliest of our dolls. She's from 1650, and she is a Mohican girl. Before the Livingstons lived at Clermont, the land belonged to the Mohicans. Now, there were several tribes that have lived here throughout the years. A little Mohican girl growing up here at the land where Clermont sits today would have lived in a pretty multicultural world. Her world would have been filled with trade, with seeing different sorts of people going up and down the river, and her outfit reflects that. Her tunic and her leggings are all made from leather, but her accessories reflect a multicultural lifestyle. You can see that she's wearing a Dutch bracelet, which was probably traded from Fort Orange up the river. She has copper, which would come from the Lake Superior Huron area. She also has a stuffed bracelet, which would be more something that comes from her own culture. She has beads and shells that would come from either the Hudson River or from along the Atlantic Ocean. And she's someone who would have definitely had interaction with the Dutch settlers. She was created with the help of Evan Pitchard, who is a descendant of the Mi'kmaq people, part of the Algonquin Nation. He's a professor of Native American history at Marist College. And also with the help of Edequa, who is a local Native American spokesperson. The doll currently doesn't have a for sure name. Unlike most of our other dolls, she's not based off of a specific person who we know about in history, but rather a stand-in for people who lived here. So we don't have a specific name for her yet. We've been working with different people from the Native American community to come up with a name for her. And right now, her name is actually Lucy. Lucy was given to us by Edequa with the idea that that might be the name that the colonists might have known her by if she ever interacted with them, but that would not be the name that her Mohican family and culture would have known her by. She is a work in progress. She's a very lovely doll, and she only represents one type of, only one part of the Native American community that lived here on the land where Clermont sits today. In fact, we are currently working with the Stockbridge-Munsee tribe to create a profile of a little girl who may have lived here 120 years later as part of the Stockbridge-Munsee tribe. And we're looking forward to continuing that conversation and expanding our line of dolls. Our next doll is Alida Schuyler. She's from 1666. She would have been 10 years old. Alida is a real person. Alida grew up in Albany, New York. A lot of people today know the last name Schuyler, even if they're not originally from the area, and that's because of the show Hamilton. Alida would be the great aunt of the Schuyler sisters from Hamilton. Alida is from an incredibly wealthy Dutch family. She's one of the daughters in the family, which means that her job is to marry well and secure more business for her family. So, Alida, at a very young age, a young teenager, is married off to the Van Rensselaer family, which is the other really wealthy Albany area family. But here's the thing. Alida's marriage was what they called a business marriage, which meant that it was entirely to connect the two families for business reasons, which means that they had a contract that stated that we know this marriage isn't for love. We know it's just kind of here for business reasons. We know her husband is like really old and sick and he's gonna pass away soon. So when that happens, Alida can just move on with her life and marry whoever she wants for love. In fact, the contract of their marriage said that there were to be no children expected of this marriage because that's how businesslike it was. But anyway, Alida grew up in a world where she knew that was expected for her. But what she didn't know was that her husband was going to hire this very handsome, young Livingston man to work for them. Robert Livingston was a Scottish immigrant who had grown up in Holland, so he spoke English and Dutch fluently, and he was hired by her husband to be a secretary. And when her husband passed away, Alida was in her early 20s, and so was Robert. And, about a year after Van Rensselaer's death, she marries Robert Livingston. And they move down the Hudson River, and they start their own family, and they purchase the land that Clermont stands on today. Now you can see Alida has this lovely dress. It looks a little plain when you first look at it. It's not as exciting as some of the other dresses we might see down the road, but it's quite fine. It's very beautiful. It has this lovely lace on it, and I love the little black bow necklace that she has on. I think it's very pretty. And up in the corner, you'll see a painting of the real Alida Schuyler Van Rensselaer Livingston. Our next doll is from 1734. This is Margaret Beekman. Margaret Beekman was the only surviving child in her family. Since there were no boys to be heirs, she was highly educated to take over her family's business. So, Margaret is a very interesting young lady. As the slide says, she's the only surviving child in her family. Now, her mom died when she was very young. Her father remarried, but he didn't have any more kids. So Margaret had an older brother, but then he dies when he's a little boy. Well, Margaret's father knew she was really smart, and he knew he could trust her to take over the family land and business and run a household. So he just said, I don't care that English law says that women can't inherit land and money. I'm going to leave everything to my daughter Margaret because I know she's capable. And her father was a Beekman from an old Dutch family. They had a lot of power, and the English government just decided they weren't going to fight with him about it. They figured, you know what? Let him do his thing. He's not bothering us. And so Margaret here was educated just as well as a boy would have been. Back then, girls didn't get to go to school. If they did, they were educated at home, and they really only learned things you would need to know to run a household. Most girls didn't learn math or, much of anything. They might learn how to read so they can read their Bible, but that's about it. Margaret here would have been educated in math, in religion, in reading, somewhat in sciences, in finance, and it made her really, really interesting to a lot of people. A lot of young men were kind of gossiping about her and saying, wow, she must be really, really smart if her father's willing to bet his 500,000 acres on her and his money and his business. So when it came time for Margaret to get married, she was really sought after by all the eligible young men, especially the eligible young men who were educated. So it's no surprise that she ends up marrying the handsome up-and-coming lawyer, Robert Livingston. Now, you might remember a little while ago I mentioned another Robert Livingston. This is that Robert's grandson, so we've skipped ahead a few generations now. But Margaret marries Robert Livingston, Robert the judge. She's 18, he's 24. And they come back here to Clermont, to the mansion, to settle down and start their family. And they ended up having 11 children together. And their oldest child is Janet Livingston. So Janet Livingston is the eldest child of Margaret Beekman and Robert the judge. She's very independent, which makes sense because she is the oldest, the biggest sister. But she's also a bit superstitious. Now, what's really fun about Janet is that when Janet was an old lady, she's in her late 70s, she actually writes all of her remembrances from her childhood. And she writes these stories like they happened yesterday. So we have a really cool, unusual insight into Janet's world growing up in colonial New York. Now, Janet, when she was about 13, decided that she couldn't stand living in her parents' house anymore with all these babies. There's just so many babies and they're everywhere. She wants to live in New York City with her grandpa Beekman and her step-grandmother, and she wants to be part of New York City, the world. Who wouldn't blame her? She doesn't want to be up in the Hudson Valley with all those babies in the quiet. So she moves to New York City. She lives with her grandparents, and she has a bedroom that she doesn't particularly like. So she starts bugging her grandfather to make one of the servants move out of their room so she can have a nicer room. So she gets her nicer room. And then she goes out in the town and she starts going to parties. And because she's the eldest Livingston daughter, the one whose parents, own most of the mid-Hudson Valley, and everyone knows she's going to inherit a lot of it, she really becomes quite a catch to many eligible young men, similar to her mother years before, except Janet's a lot younger, and a lot of the men who are interested in marrying her are a lot older. So we have these stories of Janet going out to the theater with her friends, and these older men walking up to her and trying to ask her out, and her being very confused, and then people who knew her parents kind of showing up and telling these people to buzz off. But as time went on, Janet started meeting some young men her own age who she thought were really interesting, and she might want to date them. And then they all started dying under really weird circumstances. So Janet talks about these boyfriends who start disappearing and passing away. And during this time in history, people got sick a lot easier, and sometimes people disappeared and no one really knew what happened. Those things happened. But some of the things that happened to Janet's suitors are a little mysterious. One of the stories she would tell is that this young British Navy man had asked for her hand in marriage, and she told him no. He said he was going back to England and he would return the next year, and asked if she would wait for him, and she said she would make no such promises. Well, then his ship was lost at sea, never to be seen again. Another one of her suitors died in a fox hunt. She always wondered how the fox got the best of him. And a final suitor, who she really did like, ended up dying during a fake funeral. It's pretty crazy how all these things happened to her. And Janet grew up deciding that maybe love wasn't for her. Maybe she was just going to live her life independently. She didn't have to get married. She's incredibly wealthy and she's very independent. She knows how to take care of herself, so that makes sense. But eventually, this nice Irish soldier visits her house when she's in her early 20s, and he's handsome, and they kind of have the same sense of humor, and he's fine. They get along perfectly well, and then he goes on his way. And then about 5 years later, he comes back. And the story goes that within a week, they were engaged to be wed. And thus she marries General Richard Montgomery, and thus becomes Janet Livingston Montgomery. So Janet ultimately had her happy ending, her love match, but it didn't last forever. When the Revolutionary War came around, Janet's younger brother, Robert the Chancellor, begged Richard to join the army. He'd join as a general, he'd be paid handsomely for his time, and he'd have a lovely retirement afterwards. Richard didn't really want to join the army again, but he felt like he couldn't say no to his good friend and his brother-in-law. So he joined up. And just a few days before he would have come home for a break in January, he was killed at the Battle of Quebec. Now, he's considered one of the first major American casualties of the Revolutionary War. And the night he died, Janet had this prophetic dream. She was walking hand in hand with Richard down a pathway, and the path split. And Richard let go of her hand and said, "Janet, I must go this way, and you must go this other way, and eventually we'll meet up again someday." And then Janet gets a letter a few days later saying that he had died. But Janet was a strong, independent lady. Of course, she mourned. She was kind of considered one of almost a saintly figure in America. People felt so bad for her. She was so famous. But she was an independent lady. She ended up taking a bunch of her inheritance and investing it into building this beautiful mansion called Montgomery Place and developing a farm around it so that she would always have a way to make money, and so that she and her husband would always have a place where they were remembered. And she lived a long life, and she ended up being a mentor figure to all of her younger sisters and nieces and grandnieces and even great-grandnieces, I'm pretty sure. So, although her life might have been a little bit cursed, she did have a pretty interesting life. And over here, you can see a picture of her husband. This is actually part of the collection at the Met. And below that is a sketch of Janet. Unfortunately, we don't have a really pretty portrait of Janet. There most likely was one at some point, but her parents' house was burned by the British during the American Revolution, and we know several paintings of family members were lost in the chaos. So there's likely a picture of her when she was younger that was lost there. But this sketch is so interesting. This is Janet in her late 70s as sketched by Coralie, her her niece. However, Coralie's father is Janet's youngest brother, so he's young enough to be her own child. So it's pretty nuts. But it's a lovely sketch by a 15-year-old girl who is doing her best to draw her Aunt Janet. Okay, I'm just going to take a little sip of water. Now, we've now skipped forward to 1822. This is Christiana Livingston. Christiana Livingston is the daughter of a white Livingston man and an enslaved Jamaican woman whose name was Barbara Williams. Christiana's history is really fascinating. Now, she was born a Livingston, and different sources report that she was acknowledged as a Livingston daughter, but also not treated like an enslaved person, but not treated like the rest of her Livingston siblings and cousins were. However, she grows up at her family home in Red Hook. She's not born at Clermont. She's born at one of the other Livingston houses. And her mother remained enslaved at the house that she worked at until slavery was abolished, right around the time that Christiana would have turned 10. We know that Christiana ends up living in New Jersey, where she meets Amos Freeman, who was a very well-known black abolitionist. Amos was from Brooklyn originally, but they had a house together in New Jersey, and he was a Presbyterian minister. And eventually they become a prominent part of the Underground Railroad in New Jersey, I believe Connecticut, but mostly Maine. They end up moving up to Maine, and they become a place where enslaved people escaping slavery in the South stop as one of their last stops before they got to Canada for freedom. Eventually, they moved back to New York, and Christiana and her husband are both buried in Brooklyn. Now, Christiana's story might have been lost to time were it not for her descendants who searched to find an answer to a family story. They had always heard that they were connected to a prominent New York family, and depending on the sources I find, they either knew it was the Livingstons or it was implied. But looking at this picture here in the corner of Christiana as an adult, there had always been a family story that she was related to Eleanor Roosevelt because they saw a bit of a family resemblance in this picture. And it's very interesting because Christiana's first or second cousin, was the great-grandmother of Eleanor Roosevelt. They're almost exactly the same age. They grew up essentially down the street from each other, and they definitely would have known each other growing up. But this young lady is Elizabeth Livingston Ludlow. So, as I said, Elizabeth is Christiana's cousin. They are very close in age. Elizabeth grew up in one of the other Livingston homes along Woods Road here in Germantown. The house that she eventually builds with her husband, Dr. Ludlow, no longer exists. It actually burned by an accidental fire in the 1870s. But there are two houses built on that property that were built by her children, Pine Lawn and Hallcroft. But Elizabeth would have had a life of privilege here in Germantown on her family's property. She marries Dr. Ludlow, who is from another prominent family. There's a lot of Ludlow streets. There's one in Red Hook. There's one in New York City that I actually used to live on. Eventually, she and her husband end up in New York City because he becomes the head doctor at Columbia University. But they always come back up the river to their family home. Eventually, their family home burns by accident. Their children build two houses right next door to each other on the same property. One of those children is the grandmother of Eleanor Roosevelt, and the house that she builds is the house that Eleanor Roosevelt spent most of her childhood at after her mother passed away. If you've ever seen a documentary on Eleanor Roosevelt, they often mention this house. It was a big part of her life growing up. I mean, clearly she lived there, but it really shaped her as a person. It was filled with a wide variety of family members, cousins, unmarried aunts and uncles, all kinds of exciting things, and not necessarily really happy things were happening there. The house has since fallen into disrepair, but there is a committee working on it right now to try and bring it back around. But those are all of the dolls that I'll be talking about today. We have 6 more dolls that we'll be talking about at our next meeting on January 30th. Excuse me, folks. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. I'd love to answer them in the comments. I also believe that Adrienne Westmore, the seamstress who created these beautiful dolls and the beautiful pieces that they're wearing, is in the comment section as well, so she can help answer questions. The next 6 dolls that we will be covering range from the early Victorian era to the early 20th century. And we are also currently working on more dolls, including several boy dolls that will represent young men who lived at Clermont around the time of the Revolution, during the Victorian era, and one representing the very last child who grew up here at Clermont in the late 1930s. So, thank you all for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any other questions about the dolls or about the history, please feel free to ask in the comment section, and I'll be there in just a sec. Thank you so much, and have a great day.